Proxyopoly! And welcome back, all you bulls and bears and betas out there, to the buzz of this Proxyopoly spin-off series we call the Proxyopoly TM Podcast. I am your host, Rockstar Grill Operator at Store 814, here live with a special studio audience at the Waffle House for the Proxyopoly TM score of Waffle House. And I'm pleased to inform everyone that the state of the house is sound. And without any further delay, let's just get through this. Waffle House Incorporated is a privately held restaurant company large enough to be a national cultural object and small enough, legally speaking, to avoid the disclosure rituals that public companies perform for investors. The result is an unusually clean test case for the Proxyopoly concept. What happens to shareholder democracy when the company is private, the market is illiquid, and voting power is structurally concentrated? This report applies the Proxyopoly ratings framework analogous to governance beta to measure how much the marginal impact of a single vote by a shareholder, being the employees of its company, is amplified or dampened by ownership concentration, governance fortification, executive insulation, stakeholder posture, and compliance risk. Scores are concentrated at 0 for market average equilibrium. Negative values indicate more contestable shareholder empowering governance. Positive values, as always, indicate more entrenched, insider-favored governance. And because Waffle House is a private company, there is no SEC-style proxy statement to cite. Instead, this analysis uses public reporting on labor disputes and compensation actions, including wage increases announced after organizing pressure. Public reporting on a union complaint alleging wage and hour underpayment of tipped workers assigned non-tipped duties. Public legal commentary referencing the Supreme Court's Waffle House arbitration precedent in the context of state enforcement authority. The Georgia Secretary of State's Corporations Division Business Search Portal as a baseline state record reference point, and user-provided internal excerpts from Waffle House stock option plans and investment risk factor summary. These excerpts are treated as primary internal text supplied for analysis, and they are independently verified via internal documentation. Starting with the Proxyopoly TM ratings, the proxy accumulation resistance measures how difficult it is for outside investors to accumulate enough voting power to influence outcomes, control board composition, or policy direction. Waffle House is not a typical accumulate shares, influence company environment. There is no public market, and liquidity appears structurally constrained for non-controlling holders. The provided risk factor summary explicitly describes the absence of a public market, restrictions on sale, and controlling family supermajority. That combination turns proxy accumulation into conceptual exercise rather than a practical strategy. This isn't a judgment about whether the business is well run. It's a statement about contestability. When a single family controls a supermajority of voting power, being the Rogers family, the minority shareholders' core leverage tools, coalition building, proxy contests, and threats of replacement are reduced to symbolic gestures unless a controller voluntarily yields ground. Hence why proxy accumulation resistance is scored for Proxyopoly TM rating at positive 4.60. This rating reflects structural non-contestability via private status, restricted liquidity mechanics per internal plan and documentation texts, and controlling holder dominance. Proxyopoly TM rating number 2, Bylaw Fortification Index. The Bylaw Fortification Index measures how the company's governance provisions fortify insider control or inhibit shareholder-led changes, charter and bylaw barriers, voting class designations, meeting mechanics, and procedural obstacles. In public companies, fortification typically shows up as classified boards, supermajority vote thresholds, proxy access limitations, and poison pills. In Waffle House, The fortification mechanism is more private company favored. The rule book appears embedded in the shareholder agreements, transfer restrictions, committee discretion, and custodial nominee mechanics described in the internal stock plan. Additionally, public legal ecosystem around Waffle House includes arbitration doctrine history significant enough to be referenced in modern disputes about whether state officials can pursue claims despite arbitration agreements. This is not itself a bylaw, but it is a procedural fortification theme. Channel disputes into privately managed rails where friction is minimalized for the company and maximized for challengers. Hence why the bylaw fortification index is a rating of positive 3.25. This rating reflects governance fortification by private structure and procedural design, plus a documented history of operating within and benefiting from procedural constraint frameworks. Proxyopoly TM rating number 3, shareholder hostility quotient. The shareholder hostility quotient assesses management's responsiveness to stakeholder and shareholder concerns, transparency, engagement posture, and whether dissent is treated as signal or nuisance. Waffle House has demonstrated willingness to change compensation policy under pressure, but public reporting suggests that transparency tends to lag behind pressure rather than lead it. The Associated Press reported wage increases following strikes and organizer pressure and noted the company did not confirm details directly to the AP, with union and others providing the forward momentum as well. That is a classic reactive accountability fingerprint. Action occurs, but the communication channel is controlled, delayed, or externally forced. Meanwhile, Axios reported a complaint alleging systemic underpayment of tipped workers for non-tipped duties, and noted the company did not respond to media inquiries. Even if allegations are contested, the governance culture is visible in response posture, transparent engagement versus procedural silence. Hence why, for the shareholder hostility quotient, Proxyopoly TM has designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 1.80. Not maximum hostility, but clearly positive. The pattern reads as engagement when avoidable, which is a governance risk amplifier in a structurally non-contestable ownership environment. Proxyopoly TM rating number 4, executive entrenchment factor. Executive entrenchment factor measures how insulated leadership is from replacement beyond normal performance-based accountability, including structural insulation created by ownership control. Entrenchment in private-controlled companies is rarely subtle. When control is concentrated, executives aligned with the controlling family or drawn from it operate in a low-threat environment. No activist contest, no credible proxy removal pathway, no public shareholder revolt that changes the board composition. Public reporting identifies Joe Rogers III as CEO in the wage announcement coverage. The internal risk summary describes a family supermajority voting position of 80%, continuing for the foreseeable future. In Proxyopoly terms, that is entrenchment by architecture. Even perfect minority voting cannot overcome the supermajority arithmetic. Hence why, for the executive entrenchment factor, Proxyopoly TM has designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 3.60. Leadership insulation driven primarily by concentrated family control per internal documentation reinforced by private company opacity and limited external discipline mechanisms. Proxyopoly TM rating number 5, regulatory evasion measure. Regulatory evasion measure evaluates the firm's propensity to skirt regulation, incur enforcement risk, or rely on procedural defenses that increase compliance volatility. Waffle House is not a repeat headline factory for Department of Justice or SEC settlements the way global financial firms are, but it does face meaningful labor compliance exposure. Axios reported a labor complaint alleging underpayment practices tied to tipped labor and non-tipped work assignments, exactly the kind of wage and hour issue that can generate investigations, back pay, liability, and reputational damage. Separately, Reuters arbitration commentary referencing Waffle House underscores that the company sits inside a broader legal tradition of employment dispute proceduralization, which can reduce direct accountability until a regulator intervenes. Hence why Proxyopoly TM has designated a Proxyopoly TM rating of positive 1.35 for the regulatory evasion measure, due to recurring labor compliance controversy signals and procedural accountability themes, not pushed into the above 2 range, absent confirmed, repeated, large enforcement penalties in the cited public arena. And now for the Proxyopoly TM score calculation. The final Proxyopoly TM score assessing all the Proxyopoly TM ratings is positive 2.90. A score above positive 2 signals an outlier governance regime, highly insulated control, low contestability, and an elevated systemic risk that is not priced through public market discipline because there is public market. Again, Waffle House is a private company in which its shareholders are its employees. Moving on to the next section, we are going to fly through this Waffle House style. Governance policy change recommendations. Recommendation number 1, publish a yearly governance and shareholder rights statement for minority employee shareholders. Voting structure, board roster, independence criteria, committee mandates, and conflict of interest policies. Recommendation number 2, formalize minority shareholder engagement via a chartered advisory panel and written management responses even if voting power remains unchanged, hence to reduce the shareholder hostility quotient without threatening operational control. Recommendation number 3, add a truly independent directors and publish independent standards. Private companies can do independence, they just have to choose it. And there are avenues for private equity options in the event that Waffle House does not want to dilute the shares of its employees or the value of those shares in order to achieve a non-supermajority issue. Recommendation number 4, normalize liquidity mechanics for minority shareholders, more frequent windows, clearer timelines, and aggregate reporting on repurchase offers accepted or declined without disclosing sensitive individual data. Recommendation number 5, constrain restrictive covenants tied to equity participation so employee ownership is not functionally paired with coercive leverage. Recommendation number 6, create a board-level labor and compliance oversight function with explicit responsibility for wage and hour controls, tip credit compliance, and grievance escalation. And now on to the most important section of the podcast, the Board of Directors voting recommendations. This section is intentionally blunt. When a controlling family holds 80% of the voting power as stated in the internal documentation, the Rogers family, director elections for minority shareholders become structurally non-determinative. In other words, the ballot exists for shareholders and employees to vote, but the outcome is effectively predetermined unless the controller votes against it itself. That does not mean minority shareholders, the employees, should not abstain from voting. It means their vote is best understood as a protest instrument, a recorded signal of governance objection, not a mechanism of change. Proxyopoly TM treats this as the core governance defect. When voting is reduced to ritual shareholder democracy, that becomes brand language, not corporate reality. Accordingly, Proxyopoly TM recommends voting against the entire board, including the Rogers family, primarily on the grounds that the supermajority structure converts elections into choreography. These secondary grounds are recurring labor controversy signals and limited transparency posture in public reporting, and the absence of public-grade disclosure that would allow minority shareholders to evaluate independence, oversight quality, or conflicts. The directors. Again, Proxyopoly TM recommends voting against the entire board of directors for Waffle House, namely co-chair CEO Joe Rogers III. Proxyopoly TM recommends a against vote for Joe Rogers III on the grounds that the governance conditions where controlling family supermajority powers render director elections non-competitive and essentially immune to minority sentiment. Per internal documentation, public reporting identifies Joe Rogers III as CEO in wage change announcements and other internal documentations, namely the proxy statement. In a controlled private company, leadership credibility depends disproportionately on voluntary transparency and board visible accountability, precisely what becomes optional when the vote is foreclosed by supermajority math. An against vote here is not expecting removal, it is documenting objection to the structure that makes removal unrealistic. And again, shareholders are recommended to vote against all directors of the board, everyone with the last name Rogers, because the nepotism of the company is not in its best economic interest. In addition, if there are any other items on the agenda of the proxy statement, Proxyopoly TM recommends voting against those, provided that the supermajority threshold basically means that the vote is going to go through regardless, and that every single shareholder employee should vote against, just signal a protest so that they can be heard and that their shares will actually make an impact on decisions made at a hierarchy level. In conclusion, Waffle House is a strong, real-world business with a governance structure that reads under the Proxyopoly framework as a high entrenchment outlier. A liquid minority ownership, private company opacity, and supermajority control that makes voting functionally non-competitive. Public reporting on wages and labor complaints further shows how accountability tends to materialize under pressure rather than through continuously legible governance mechanisms. The Proxyopoly score of positive 2.92 is not a moral verdict, it is a structural diagnosis. The governance system is built to be stable, but stability becomes a risk factor when it also becomes an immunity. In this environment, supermajority shares are not a lever of change, they can be a protest record. When protest becomes the primary function of voting, shareholder democracy can be a system that does not work for employee shareholders. And just like that, we have wrapped up the analysis of the corporate governance framework of Waffle House, the greatest restaurant on planet Earth. This place means a lot to me and has meant a lot to a lot of people here. So it is important that we take care of them and so that the general public is aware of the nature of its ownership. An 80% supermajority voting threshold and a whole charade of having a shareholder meeting for all of its employees, its shareholders, to get together and make decisions on how the company is run is a bit of a farce when, again, shareholders that are the employees can only vote up to 20%. So anything that the company or the board puts on the ballot is going to go through regardless. It is a smoke and mirror game of what I consider to be a governance risk. And at any rate, it has been a pleasure to service everyone here under this yellow sign. Some of us were pretty much raised in one of these buildings. So, you shouldn't have to tell someone what it means to hold the line under the yellow sign. They should already know. The Waffle House has found its new host. And as always, we leave you with a final disclaimer. The professional opinions expressed in this podcast are property of Proxyopoly TM. The Proxyopoly score and accompanying analysis are purely communicative for educational entertainment purposes only. This Proxyopoly TM research report in its verbalized or written form is solely for informational objectives only, does not constitute investment advice, and shall not be misconstrued as a suggestion or an offer to buy or sell any securities. No generalist or sensationalist statements are intended or being made. Resemblance to real-world events may be deliberate, though with Waffle House's current trajectory, reality may be catching up faster than anticipated, while past performance is not indicative of future returns. And that's all the time we have for today, Proxyopolis. I'm wrapped up. Would y'all like to make some noise with the microphone?
Woo, Waffle!
All right, that'll do. Thank you, Bev.